Well, I'm James Greer Babb Jr. and came to Charlotte, born in New York City, moved to Charlotte as a 5-year-old, and was fortunate enough to move into the Dilworth neighborhood. Went to Dilworth Elementary School with the former president of the University of North Carolina, Dick Spangler, and with another former president and CEO of McClatchy Newspaper, who bought the News and Observer for them, a man by the name of Erwin Potts. So actually, the prelude to my getting into broadcasting started while I was at Dilworth School. They had a little newspaper, school newspaper, and by the time I got to 6th grade, I could write well enough. I was a sports editor of Dilworth Highlights and Headlines. I might say that it was a very good little newspaper, and we had a lot of fun, so that got me into the communication business, unpaid, at a very tender age. So anyway, grew up in Charlotte, graduated from Central High School, great old high school, which is the first building on the primary site of Carolina Central Piedmont Community College on Elizabeth Avenue. And happily, they preserved that building and renovated it, and so it's still in existence after being built in 1922. I didn't start in 1922, mind you, but I did start about 30 years later after that. Anyhow, I grew up going to Central High School, and while there, I broadened my journalism experience. I followed a good friend by the name of Jack Claiborne, who was at one time associate editor of the Observer, and I followed him as covering high school sports in Charlotte while a student, a senior at Central, and Jack had gone off to Chapel Hill, and so I followed him there and worked. I think we got 50 cents an hour or 50 cents a page. I can't remember now, it's been so long. Then anyhow, followed Jack a couple of different places. Ended up at Chapel Hill. We ended up as roommates, and he got me a job in the news bureau at that time in Chapel Hill. And the news bureau was working for a man by the name of Bob Madry, Colonel Madry they call him. Fascinating man. And but he had a kind of short memory, and he was kind of short in stature to begin with. His desk with paper was usually taller than he was. So one day during the indoor games, back in those days, Southern Conference indoor games, not the ACC, at Woolen Gymnasium, Jack said, "Won't you go on down?" He knew I was a track enthusiast, so I went down, and the first time as soon as I walked in the building, first person I bumped into was Colonel Madry. Oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be at work. So I stuttered a little bit, and I said, "Colonel Madry, how are you, sir?" He said, "I'm fine. I remember you from down east, aren't you?" He didn't realize who I was, and I've been working for him for a year, so I didn't make much of an impression, obviously, on my boss back at that time. Probably the case with a lot of other bosses down through the years, but we won't get into all that. Anyhow, was at Chapel Hill and ended up going into the Army during what is known as the Korean conflict. It seemed like pretty much a war to those involved in it. But once again, I couldn't have been luckier, being lucky to be brought to Charlotte at a very tender age and growing up in a wonderful neighborhood with good friends, some of whom we're still close friends after 80 years or more. So it's been a wonderful experience. And in the Army, I first was turned down because I'd had a back injury playing football, what they called back in those days a dislocated disc. And so they made me go get some additional tests, and finally, about 3 months later, I entered the Army at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And this, again, a terribly lucky episode in my life. One day while I was in basic training, I was cleaning out my rifle, had to take it apart and put it back together. The commander, Lieutenant Ray, a Duke graduate, walked up, and of course, I did what all private E1s do. I stood up, saluted, and until he told me to relax, and had another lieutenant with him. And so they were asking me what I was doing, et cetera. And of course, they already knew, but they were seeing if I knew what I was doing, I guess. So during the course of the conversation, I see the little gold bar, identity bar that the guest of Lieutenant Ray had, and on it had Converse, C-O-N-V-E-R-S-E. So after he asked me a few questions, I said to him, "Sir, may I ask you a question?" He said, "Of course." I said, "Would you happen to be from Spartanburg, South Carolina?" He said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Would you happen to know Walter Converse?" He said, "He's my brother." And I said, "Well, I was his fraternity brother at Chapel Hill." And so it led into other things. And finally, about 2 weeks later, I'm transferred to the Post Public Information Office, where I had the good fortune of handling sports information for Fort Jackson. And it was a small group of guys from all over, from the University of Georgia, and just a great group of characters, I might add, real characters. So we had we had kind of the run of the base because we were doing various stories of all kind. Anyhow, Fort Jackson being the intake base, this being during the Korean conflict or war, there were a lot of athletes coming through there, outstanding athletes, world-class athletes, World Series type players, including people like Dick Groat from Duke, and Haywood Sullivan from, I think, University of Florida, but played for the Red Sox, Don Newcomb, the great ace of the Los Angeles Dodgers. So anyway, I wrote this, first I wrote a story on football. It got wide circulation, to my great surprise. And it was, part of the reason was because there was the coach, football coach there, was a man by the name of B.D. Feathers, who had coached at NC State. And of course he had all these guys coming in service from all over, right out of college, some pros as well. So I wrote a story and kind of headlined it, B.D. Feathers is singing a famous song, No Help Wanted. And he also, I had tears on my ears from crying over you. So it got great play. Thanks again to Jack Claiborne, who was at the Observer and ran it and circulated throughout the Southeast for sure. So we're in the office one day, and my captain, who was in charge of the Post Information Office, a man by the name of Fletcher Morgan, came up and said, "Babb, what have you done?" I said, "Sir, I'm not sure. What do you mean what have I done?" He said, "The general wants to see us right now." I said, "The general? I don't know the general, sir." He said, "Well, you're going to find out pretty soon. You're going to meet him pretty soon." So it was right across the street from where the Post Public Information was. So we would go to the headquarters and walk in, snap to attention, of course, sit down, and the general says, "Sit down, relax." He said, "About that story you wrote about our football coach and not needing any help because he had all these people coming in here. Do you know how this works, Private?" I said, "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean." He said, "Well, we can hold anybody on this base if we want to, or they can go to other bases for training or whatever." I said, "Well, I didn't know that. I didn't think about that, sir." He said, "Well, his commanding general, the 3rd Army, was mad at him for keeping all the good players coming in." So that's the first time I ever been told, as a publicist, promotion guy, "Cut back. You're going too strong here." In that, so obviously I was very lucky to have that opportunity to end up further in my professional career. After getting out of the Army, I went to work for a friend for a while in an electronic wholesale business. And I discovered, after about 4 or 5 months, that my friends back even in those days knew I was technically challenged, and therefore I wasn't going to be a big hit on selling electronics. So in any event, I went back to the Observer and talked to them about a potential job, and so they ended up offering me a job, and as a sports writer. And I was walking down the main street in Charlotte, South Tryon Street, and past the Wilder building, which was the original home of WBT Radio and WBTV. And once again, a good friend who I started first grade with by the name of Julian Massey was on the production staff at WBTV, and we were like brothers. I was in his wedding, and I spent more time with he and his wife I did my own family. And so I just happened to bump into him 30 seconds earlier, 30 seconds later, or maybe even 15 seconds, we'd never seen each other. So anyhow, I'm walking away, and Julian said, "Hey, Jim, I just thought of something." I said, "What's that?" He said, "There's a job opening at WBTV who had just moved out to Fulfillment Hill, as they call it back then, on Moorhead Street, into this fabulous new facility. And they were doing part-time uptown and mostly working on Moorhead." He said, "Yeah, there's a promotion job open there. You'd be just right for it." I said, "Well," he said, he gave me the name of the guy to call. No cell phones, of course, by the name of John Dillon. And he said, "Yeah, you ought to check into it." So I said, "What the heck?" So as I walked down Tryon Street, there was a store there owned by a friend who was in high school with. I went in, asked him if I could use their phone. So I called John Dillon, and I told him who I was and how Julian had recommended I give him a call. He said, "Well, come on out." I said, "When?" He said, "Right now." I said, "Okay." So I had to call the Observer and say, "I'm going to be a little later. Is that okay?" It wasn't a problem. So I go out there, and an hour later, he offers me a job. And the Observer my starting salary was going to be $55 a week. And I was going to have to work everything except Tuesday and Wednesday night. For a single guy, that was not totally appealing, of course. But anyhow, make a long story short, John Dillon offered to pay me $65 a week.
Oh, wow.
And work days, Monday through Friday. So I wasn't that smart, but I was smart enough to know that sounded like a better deal. So anyhow, that's how I got into TV. And there, the other link of meeting Lieutenant Converse, meeting Julian, just by chance, nothing planned. Didn't know what just bumped into him. So anyhow, that's how I got into broadcasting. And that was first day was January the 1st, 1956. And stayed there at BTV in the promotion department, writing stories and hand deliver them to the Observer, and deliver them by mail to small newspapers all over in Belmont and Salisbury and Rock Hill, whatever. TV was pretty big back in those days as a new entity. And anyhow, but once again, luck struck beautifully for me. That's where I met my wife, who was on the city desk at the Observer and a columnist for the Observer. And even though we had both gone to Central High School, I was 2 years older than her, so she was a sophomore. And I kid her, she was the only sophomore girl in high school who didn't know who I was, but she rightly rejects that concept. So anyhow, we had so I got to know her, and we started dating, and happily 3 years later we got married. But shortly after, a couple of years in the television promotion department, working with some extremely talented people. There were 4 of us in the department, and I must say they were as talented a group of people: artists, writers, general promotion. John Dillon, who was in charge. It was a fun time. Television was definitely in a growth area. Just about everything I wrote got printed. About all the famous people at BTV then, and still to this day, in my mind, the most talented group of people I've ever seen in broadcasting. Clyde McLean, better known as Cloudy McLean, Alan Newcomb, who was both the Atlantic weatherman and could do an editorial, Doug Mays, who was a news anchor on the SO report originally, but also quite a talented musician. Clyde McLean could be on a country and western show with Arthur Smith and the Crackerjacks, move out of that studio and TV into the radio studio and do a classical music, and just incredible bunch of people. So that was just a wonderful experience. But in any event, I was offered a job in radio sales once I again run into the general manager of WBT Radio, who I knew but not well. TV and radio were pretty well separated, even on separate floors in a lot of ways. And but you never know when opportunities can strike. I happened to be in the men's restroom, and Buddy Evans, better known as Virgil V. Evans, walked in. And as we were getting ready to depart, he says, why don't you come in the radio? I said, well, I've never thought about it, never been asked. He said, well, I'm asking. I said, well, think about it. Later downstairs in the Pine Terrace at WBTV, which was their own little cafeteria, I was sitting there with Julian Massey, my lifetime friend, who had told me about the job at BTV. We were sitting there, and this guy walked in. He was all dressed up in suit and tie. And he said, you know what that guy does? I said, no, I'm not sure why. I didn't know who he was. He said, well, that's Tom Ashcraft. He's in radio sales. He said, you know how much money he made last year? I said, I have no idea. He said, $8,000. I said, $8,000. I'm going to get one of those jobs. That sounds too good to pass up. So sure enough, I ended up going into radio. And I'm about to get married about the same time. Then one of the agencies I called on, Cox and Jackson, asked me to come work for them as an account executive. And they offered me $9,000 a year.
Wow.
And so another big raise from $65 a week to certainly $9,000 a year. About to get married, sounded like a great opportunity for me. So I went to work for them. I quit my job at BT, bought a house, a new car, and got married, all within the space of 3 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
So anyhow, I go to work for them, and it was interesting work, except they assigned me to an account, a gubernatorial candidate, to travel all over the state and work the media for them. And the problem was I had 2 years previously to that committed to Terry Sanford to be governor. And I had been working for him on the side, not professionally, as a volunteer. And I got in the campaign. While the candidate they had me represent him, I didn't really have my heart in it. I mean, I just didn't feel honest. I didn't feel clean. And you know, my friends at the Sanford campaign were kind enough not to ask me things that are, you know, confidential type things, but I just never felt comfortable in the campaign. And so now it's February, and I get a call from the personnel manager, another Carolina graduate by the name of Bill Melson, who later became head of radio and TV at the University of Alabama. Fabulous guy, a good broadcaster himself. Called me and said he'd like to have lunch with me. So we had lunch, and he said, we want you to come back. And he said, I want you to come back, it's not as a salesman, but as a sales manager, a local sales manager. And you know, I was very awkward. I'd only been this other job at that point 5 months, and so I had terribly mixed feelings about what I should do, though down deep inside I really wanted to go back. So anyway, we talked about it. Ironically, ran into some of the WBTV people at the restaurant, and so the word was out Babb was coming back before I had even decided that's what I was going to do. So I'm thinking about it, and I got a call from Buddy Evans, better known Virgil V. Evans, who was the general manager. He said, I want to come talk to you. I said, okay, fine. You know, so he came, and incidentally, they had become a client of mine, BT, of the agency. Really? So obviously I was going to do whatever a client wanted, plus he was a fine fellow as well. He said, I want to give you we'll let you know something, that I'm going to resign in a week, and I'm going to Charleston to run WCSC, the CBS station there. And Paul Marion, who was then general sales manager, I'm sure he's going to get my job. I'm going to recommend him, but I don't think there's any doubt. And if you come back, I think you will be promoted to general sales manager. And so that was very appealing. So sure enough, as he said, so I went back and as regional sales manager, and shortly thereafter, a matter of weeks, maybe a month or so, is before he resigned, and the path that he laid out did happen. So again, how lucky I was, just the right time. So I was in sales manager BT from March the 1st of 1960. My first day was a Wednesday. It snowed like you'd never seen snow in Charlotte, North Carolina before. You couldn't move in the city. I lived relatively close by, so I was able to get there. And I got there, and I was the only one in the sales department. So I got on the phone, and I started calling people, and I was hot. I said, you have 1 hour to get here. I don't care if you have to walk here, bring in a helicopter. You better be here in 1 hour. Like 11 o'clock, it was the magic hour. So I only had 3 salespeople at that time. And so I told them, and then I started calling the sales assistant. You got the same deal with you. You better be in here. And within a reasonable period of time, one of them lived a long way away, so she got a pass. But anyway, they came in, and they looked at me. Okay, we're here now. What are we going to do? I had a phone book. You've heard the old story about sales manager. Well, I literally did that. I took the phone book and I got the yellow pages. I ripped them out, and I started A through F and F through whatever, and finally I said, get on the phone now. And to their surprise, they actually sold stuff on the telephone that day. And I mean, it was a big day. For radio back then, $15,000 on a half-day snowy day was a big day, even at WBT Radio, which was, of course, a big station. So anyhow, they got the message, and we were selling to people that never factories to let their workers know they were open or not open things. So it opened up a whole new world to us. And lo and behold, on March 8th, the same thing happened again. More snow, more late coming into the office, more hot phone calls from me. And so finally got the message. And now, for the first time in history in Charlotte, on the 3rd Wednesday in a row in March, it snowed like crazy. I was the last one in the office that day. So fortunately we had a good group, a lot of fun. I saw one of the men that was a young man at the time that worked for me, and I saw him just recently, and we had a good visit and a lot of laughs about that. So he turned out to also be a colleague in the world of politics. We're now moving to the election of 1960, the presidential election, obviously between Nixon and John Kennedy. And we were in New York. I was in New York, and he was going to meet me and pick me up. We were going to go to the inaugural. That was in January of '61, and again, it snowed like crazy. So we never got to our hotel room that night. We literally got there like 6 a.m. the day of the inauguration itself, and we had a good time on it. That was during that campaign of 1960. Of course, Terry Sanford ran and was elected, and he also was the first major Southern politician to come out for John F. Kennedy. In fact, I can't even remember if there was another one, but he may have been the first and only. but anyhow, he certainly was helpful in North Carolina for Kennedy. I took on a different role there, and since I wasn't on the air at BT or BTV, and my superiors approved it, I didn't have a conflict. It's not like I had control of the news content or any of that type thing. So I was with a woman by the name of Gladys Tillett, who was one of the primary movers of women's suffrage. And I wrote 5-minute radio. Now, I don't know anybody does 5-minute radios anymore, programs. But it was about Catholicism and about why it was okay to vote for a Catholic, and that the Pope was not going to interfere in these things, or if he tried, that the president had stated quite eloquently that he was not, it was country over church at that point. And so we had a great time, and obviously we had a terrific time when with the winners we had. Anyhow, that was a great time, and I must say the people I worked for were wonderful and allowed me to do what I did. The interesting thing there, the president of the company at that time was a fabulous man, a great broadcaster by the name of Charles H. Crutchfield. And Charles Crutchfield was pretty much a conservative, very much a supporter of Nixon, and but he allowed me to do that, and as did the man I worked for, Paul Marion, and the then head of television, a man by the name of Ken Treadwell. So again, I didn't confuse things. Weren't any blurred lines there at that point. But fortunately, again, luck was on my side. After about 7 years in radio, there was some changes in the corporate structure, not people leaving, but moving up. And Wally Jorgensen, who was the then vice president, general manager at WBTV, moved into a corporate job as executive vice president of the company. And Tom Cookley was then the sales manager of WBTV, moved up, and he offered me an opportunity to come into television. And it was real hard because we were competitors. I mean, we fought as hard against BTV as we did WSOC or the Observer or anybody else. I mean, the fact that we liked it even better when we took accounts away from them. Anyhow, she offered me the job, and I was really torn because we're a very close-knit group in radio. And but I had Crutchfield asked me to have lunch with him one day, and he said, "I want you to move to television." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I think bigger future in television." And again, this was in 1967. So after thinking about it and for a few weeks, I decided to, okay, I moved because I had a really great sales staff, and I had a guy in waiting who was certainly well qualified to take over as sales manager at WBT Radio. And so we made the move, and a lot of people, there was a lot of good movement, all upward movement for 4 or 5 of us that time. I'm now on television, and the first challenge of Tom Cookley, another Duke guy, as I kid him, he's one of my favorite Duke people, but I can't remember who the other one is to save my life. We had discussed, he said, well, I did 75% share of the television business in Charlotte last year. I knew that was a challenge, and both to me is a new guy coming in and replace him, but from a Duke guy to a Carolina guy. So I said, okay. So we were able to improve on that the first year. So we're now about 2 years down the road, and a couple of things happened. In the course of all this time, WBTV had an offspring known as Jefferson Productions, and they were in the business of producing. First, they they syndicated the Arthur Smith Show in about 35 markets. And Arthur was a fabulous entertainer, musician, just extremely talented, very bright. And the show did so well on WBTV that some of our clients wanted to move it into other markets. So John Dillon was then running that division, and he got it syndicated in 35 markets all over the Southeast, and it was very successful. Then they went from that to producing commercials, and we produced a lot of commercials for major companies. Ironically, did the Ford 75th anniversary spots with a man by the name of Bill Cosby, who spent 2 weeks in Charlotte at our station and befriended one of our young aspiring comedians, and became a real friend of our company. So it's very sad for me and for others that were there to see the outcome here. It's very sad that would be at the end of his career doing this. Anyhow, we did a lot of the most famous one that got everybody's attention was the Gunilla Knudsen, the Noxemer, beautiful blonde, take it off, take it all off, shaven. She did spots here for quite some time. Robert Wagner did his first television commercial, and maybe last, I don't even know, with us. I actually was able to buy the sport coat he modeled in that commercial. I got it quite a discount, of course, since. But anyhow, that was fun, and but it went so. Yeah, it ran into a little shaky ground, and Mr. Crutchfield asked me to step in, and so I was doing a dual role, still a general sales manager at WBTV, and whatever the title was mostly not a title, working in JP. And so finally, the business was changing from big studio, big cameras, lots of cameras, pedestal cameras, to more mobility, just like Susan's doing here today. Smaller cameras and mostly film, though videotape was just beginning to come on a little bit. And I think most people remember the videotape back in those days, quad, things like that. But mobility became, and outdoors. I mean, people were moving, the major agencies were moving out of the studio setup into location shooting. We set up a film operation. It was kind of counter to our core nature, and the broadcast end of it, mostly videotape. And so anyhow, we looked at it, and we were concerned about whether it was a business worth staying or not. Well, I asked Mr. Crutchfield for some promotional dollars, $10,000, and he readily agreed. Again, didn't seem like a lot of money by today's standards, it's a drop in the bucket. But back there, and what we did with it, we entertained most of the big agency producers in New York. We had a big luncheon and everything, and so we had a good turnout. And then we were going to have an after work thing at our apartment. We had a company apartment in New York, and so our sales rep who was there, and it was up to him to invite the key people to come over for a happy hour, adult beverages after work that day. Well, number one, it was a relatively modest-sized apartment, so 12 or 15 people would have been a crowd, and so I think it was 35 or 40 that showed up. And we quickly ran out of ice, and fortunately, we lived just right around the corner is customary in New York from a grocery store. So while everybody else was doing stuff and moving in, and it was raining. I mean, you couldn't hardly see your hand in front of your face. Rain was coming down sideways. So I go to the store so that Bert, our salesman, could entertain the clients that he knew. I didn't even know them, most of them. So I come back, I get on the elevator, and I get off the elevator, and I said, is the building on fire? and so there was, there was smoke coming out of our apartments. Oh my gosh, what's happening? Here's what was happening. I go into the apartment, and there was Bert with a machine rolling out. You know what he was rolling out and passing around the room. I quickly opened every room, every window in the apartment. Rain was pouring out. I couldn't care less. I closed the party down. Here we were entertaining clients. This party's over. I said, I can't. If this gets out, Jim Babb busted for a marijuana party in New York, company's New York apartment. I said, oh my God, I'm through for life here. So that was my first exposure. At not too tender age, in the mid-30s, of what people called the weed back then. So anyhow, we got by that, and as it turned out, I don't think we turned off too many producers. But as the businesses continued to, it became, we became aware it was not a good business for us to be in long term. So later we converted the production company, commercial production company, and syndicator, still doing the Arthur Smith Show, into what we call JP Sports. And we went after television broadcast rights. And I had known C.D. Chesley forever and had worked with him literally since 1957 when helped promote ACC basketball. Most people today think that tickets already been easy to get, and I mean hard to get, and always sold out. Well, that's not the case at all. And the truth is, it was sometimes difficult to sell out the tournament even. And anyhow, and the other thing was that what happened while I was still at BTV sales manager, C.D. Chesley would end up the week of the tournament and not be sold out on the television rights. So I talked to him once. I said, how about let me sell any of your unsold inventory? I said, just let me know Monday morning. Back then the tournament was Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I said, also you had to get commercials in. It wasn't like now they come down on the internet. You don't have to worry about it. Everything was quad again and had to be shipped. And as much of that was before FedEx was a factor in the world. So, it's basically land-based delivery system. So anyhow, he did. And then I said, well, how about let me sell it not just in Charlotte? And he said, okay. So we put together a string of stations in the Carolinas, and we sold the spots, and they got paid obviously for carrying them, so that worked out very well for us. And all my salespeople got little bonuses as a result of selling what became a hot commodity. Anyhow, as we moved along, and we wanted to convert, we tried to get Chesley to sell us the rights or have us go in business with them. And CD was spectacular human being. He had a throat problem and had air. He had to suck in air to talk. And but he was one of the greatest storytellers I've ever known in my life. He could tell stories, both true stories and jokes, as well as anybody I've ever known. And anyhow, we talked him into letting us do it. But what he was not was well organized. He was a loose cannon as far as paperwork and all that type of thing. Totally honest. And how he remembered all this stuff he did, I don't know. But a couple things happened. Once, so I talked him into letting us, Wally Jorgensen and I, come see him about either going into business with him or taking over the ACC rights. That was 1978, I guess, or thereabouts. And anyhow, Wally Jorgensen was president of the company, and I was vice president, general manager, BTV, and running the production aspect as well. So Wally wanted to fly up to Linville to meet Chesley at Grandfather Golf and Country Club. Anyhow, we get there, and the pilot can't get the plane on the landing over at the strip in between the area. So after about 3 tries, tapped him on the shoulder, go back to Charlotte. So we went back to Charlotte, drove up there. Chesley, we had a nice conversation, but nothing happened. So that happened a couple of times. I'm now advancing to 1981. 1981, and the tournament is in Landover, Maryland. And so we're at a reception, ACC reception, and Chesley comes up to me and says, are you going to be in town Tuesday? I said, for you? He said, yes, of course I will be in town. He said, well, I'd like to come down and see you. Well, I immediately thought, he's ready to talk. So make a long story short, I told my wife, who I would normally take to dinner with somebody like that, I think we're going to be discussing business, so I'll just bring him by the house and we'll have a beverage, and then CD and I go to dinner. So we go to dinner, and I'm sitting there waiting for him, and nothing happens. We talked about it, didn't talk about a lot of things, to be honest about it. So finally, I take him back to his hotel, and Mary Lou said, what happened? I said, nothing, absolutely nothing. Next day, our people at the station, Wally said, what happened? I said, absolutely nothing. I said, no. I mean, nothing. He didn't bring up anything. Well, sadly, we later learned he was on the early stages of Alzheimer's. And so he had I apparently forgot why he came to Charlotte. The rights then went to somebody else for 1 year, for 1982, and but then we got busy. We ended up collaborating with Rick and Dee Ray with Raycom, and we put together Raycom JP Raycom. We made a joint presentation, and we got it. The most that Chesley had ever paid for the rights was $1 million. And then the 1 year rights holder paid $2 million. So we went in with a package of $18 million for 3 years. Quite a leap. $5 million, $6 million, $7 million. And we end up getting the rights to in 1982. Happily, Carolina won the national championship that year. And it worked out very well. The one interesting thing was that I had put together a proposal for Greensboro. We were owned by Jefferson Pilot, of course, and Wally sent it up to the contact at the insurance company, and it was like 4 or 5 days before we had to go to Greensboro to make the presentation. So we did that, and so I kept asking Wally, have you heard back from Bill? He said, no. And so finally, it's now, we got to leave and to go to Greensboro on a Tuesday before the tournament started. So he said, I said, well, we're heading up there. We're going to have a meeting tomorrow, so let me know. So anyhow, we go into the meeting, and first I called, well, again, no cell phones, one pay station in the Holiday Inn, Four Seasons, which everybody in the world knows it's been in Greensboro. And so I called Wally. He said, no, I hadn't heard from Bill. I said, well, it's fishing time. We can't cut bait anymore. I'm going to go in and make the proposal. And there was this dead silence on the other end of the phone. So I said, well, you okay with that? He said, yeah, okay. So I go in and make the presentation. We get the deal done. I come out, tell Wally, I got we're done. We just got to put it to paper here, but we have a deal. And I, of course, assumed that he was going to call the people at Jefferson Pilot Life Insurance Company and tell them, right? I was wrong. He had not. So now we wake up the next morning, and the Greensboro Daily News has some big headlines. Jefferson Pilot commits $18 million to ACC rights. Again, the most that ever been paid for 3 years was $4 million. And so I had a breakfast meeting early on, like at 7 o'clock, whatever. So phones were ringing all over Charlotte at the broadcast company headquarters. Nobody could find me. Again, no cell phones. Nobody knew where I was. So finally, about 10 o'clock, I called him, and while his secretary answered the phone, said, "Where are you?" Everybody's looking for you. I said, what do you mean? She said, they didn't know. They just read in the paper about what you did. I said, oh, yeah. Well. So anyway, she said, you better call over Roger Soul's office right now. So I called over there, and his associate, who was a good friend of mine, Bill Blackwell, says, you better get over here quick. So I got over there, and so we talked about the deal, but that was a very interesting period of time, I might add.